You're saying that there was a greater Holocaust of Christians that happened, and it was committed by the Bolsheviks, and the leader of them at the time was a Jewish guy.
Well, Henry Pagoda, what really ran the Gulag camp systems.
Is she saying Jews or Bolsheviks?
No, she's saying Jews.
Yeah, I mean,
Wow.
because the
the head Bolsheviks were Jews.
yeah.
Yay 24 in the chat.
You may have heard the terms Judeo-Bolshevism or cultural Marxism online before, especially in far-right circles. Judeo-Bolshevism is a term used by the far right in order to classify the Russian Revolution and communism as inherently Jewish and destructive to Western values. Documentaries, which is honestly too generous of a word, such as Europa: The Last Battle, claim that Jews, including Marx, created and acted on communist ideology in order to weaken Europe and achieve Jewish supremacy over Christians during the USSR's rise and reign. On the surface, some of this may make sense. Marx was Jewish, Lenin was Jewish, Trotsky was Jewish. How could communism not be a Jewish originated ideology? But of course, the reason I'm making this video is to dive deep into the manipulations and half-truths that are peddled in order to recruit people to the far right and breed more anti-Semitism. Also, for the record, despite what the comments from Trad Crusader 1488 and Hitler's Top Guy will tell you, I'm not religiously or ethnically Jewish, nor is either side of my family. But I digress, let's get into the video. To start this section off, communism as an economic and political system was coined by Karl Marx, a Jewish person only in ethnicity, and Friedrich Engels, a non-Jewish person. Both have been unapologetic in their writings that they did not create this system itself. Both the Communist Manifesto and Engels' Socialism, Utopian and Scientific discuss class wars and revolutions that occurred decades before they were even born, along with critiquing serfdom and the current economic models of their times. Engels even states in Socialism, Utopian and Scientific that between 1838 and 1842, the first national working class movement, that of the English Chartists, reached its height. The class struggle between the proletariat and bourgeoisie came to the front in the history of the most advanced countries in Europe, in proportion to the development and of the newly acquired political supremacy of the bourgeoisie. That's also ignoring the primitive and past societies that actually were moneyless, classless societies where resources were allocated amongst tribes according to their needs, which most would call communism. This may seem like I'm splitting hairs and playing semantics, but the far right thrives on leaving this context out. Half because they want to manipulate you into agreeing with them, and half because none of them have ever read Marx or Engels. Additionally, Marx was a staunch atheist and pretty critical of the Jewish religion and its exceptions for usury and financial components. There's stronger evidence to suggest that Marx as a Jew was an anti-Semite than evidence that Marx invented communism to destroy the West. Moving on to the USSR, Vladimir Lenin was born to two Christian parents and baptized. The claim that Lenin was Jewish traces back to his maternal grandfather, which Lenin was unaware of. With that in mind, you can see how the claim Vladimir Lenin was Jewish does a lot of heavy lifting for that 25%. Under Jewish law, Lenin's mother wouldn't even be able to pass down Jewish status due to her being a Christian.
I just made the whole connection.
What's more is that Lenin criticized Jewish capitalists in his writing, claiming that they were equally as bad as any other capitalist, which isn't really pro-Jewish agenda of him despite what these far-right conspiracists claim. There's also a claim made in Europa: The Last Battle that Joseph Stalin was allegedly Jewish, and they literally give no evidence for it.
We can't know for sure if Stalin was Jewish, but at least he spoke Yiddish and had 3 Jewish wives. Some historians claim that Stalin was Georgian, and some say that he was a Georgian Jew. Los Angeles B'nai B'rith Messenger, for example, stated that Stalin was a Jew.
Historians universally agree that there are no documents or evidence that Stalin was a Georgian Jew, so this was just kind of a useless tangent to go off on because they couldn't slap him with the Jew label. Also, on the topic of Stalin, let's take a moment to examine their claim that Stalin was somehow controlled by his Jewish wives to support Zionism and the creation of Israel. Firstly, Stalin was a notorious figure who ruthlessly maintained control over his own government, regularly purging even those closest to him, including Jews. The idea that he would suddenly become a puppet of his Jewish wives really requires a lot of stretching, especially considering that his policies included crackdowns on Jewish institutions and cosmopolitanism. While it is true that Stalin seemingly did a 180 on his views on Zionism, the Soviet Union's early position on the creation of Israel was far more about pragmatism than any genuine support for Zionism itself. Kibbutzism, with its focus on collective labor and communal farming, seemed to align with Soviet ideals of collective ownership and state-run agriculture. But Stalin's enthusiasm was more about geopolitics and fighting his new allied adversaries than ideology. When Israel failed to align with Soviet interests in the region, Stalin's support quickly evaporated, with the Soviet Union eventually breaking ties with Israel and aligning itself with Arab nations in the region. But in summary, the notion that Stalin's foreign policy or even domestic policy was shaped by his Jewish wives is not just historically misleading and inaccurate, it's a blatant misreading of Stalin's motivations. But let's get into the meat and potatoes of the Judeo-Bolshevism conspiracy. The real meat and potatoes of the Judeo-Bolshevism conspiracy is that Jewish people made up a majority of the Bolshevik Party of Russia. This is a half-truth. Jewish people were overrepresented in the Bolshevik Party, but did not make up a majority of the party. Putin himself even wrongly claimed that it was made up of 80 to 85% of Jews. According to the 1922 Bolshevik Party census, there were 19,564 Jewish Bolsheviks, and in the 1920s, out of the most high-ranking committees, only 6% were ethnic Jews. Jewish people were targeted by the Tsar and were on the receiving end of pogroms, so it's not really a surprise that they sided in support of the Bolsheviks. It's like making a conspiracy theory that black people were plotting against the fall of America because they were anti-government during the civil rights movement. Also, adding on to that, there wasn't a unified effort from all Russian Jews backing the Bolshevik Party, considering some preferred the ideology of Zionism or were okay with the status quo. On the topic of religion, Candace Owens and others have often spread the narrative that Judeo-Bolsheviks waged a genocide on Christians. While the Bolshevik USSR government was officially atheist and did suppress religion, their persecution wasn't about targeting Christians specifically and was part of a broader effort to promote a secular Marxist state. This meant that all religious groups, including Christians, were targeted. Churches were destroyed, religious leaders were executed, and religious practices were banned. I personally put this as one of the USSR's major mistakes and think that their killing and dismantling of religious leaders and institutions did more damage than good and led us to misinformation like this. Some key figures in the Bolshevik movement like Leon Trotsky were Jewish, but the Bolshevik movement wasn't driven by a Jewish agenda, especially in terms of religion. Most of the Jews in the Bolshevik Party agreed with atheism or honestly didn't care that much about their own ethnicities. The right-wing/Christian narrative that Jews were out to genocide Christians is a sensationalized half-truth that misrepresents the broader politically motivated repression of religion in the Soviet Union, which affected people from all walks of life, not just Christians. If the majority of Russians were Muslims or even Jewish people, the same result would have happened. The Judeo-Bolshevism conspiracy also falls apart when you combine this knowledge with their claims that Jewish bankers and politicians orchestrated both World War I and World War II in order to destabilize Europe and create their Jewish homeland. Although deals were made with the Nazi Party in Germany in order to move Jews towards mandatory Palestine, it makes no sense why Jewish capitalists would invent an anti-capitalist ideology in order to destabilize Europe just for funsies and for Jewish supremacy. But this line of thinking brings us to the modern applications of cultural Marxism and Judeo-Bolshevism. The idea that Jews are simultaneously both greedy, scheming capitalists and the founders of the anti-capitalist ideology of communism is one of the major contradictions in far-right conspiracies. The notion that Jews as a monolithic group were the founders of communism as some sort of Jewish plot is an oversimplification that ignores the movement's broader origins and the works of figures like Karl Marx, who was a militant atheist, and the many non-Jewish figures who contributed to its development, along with the many non-Jewish and non-European figures who also fought to make their own country socialist and communist. As for the claims of Jews running the banks and controlling the media, it conveniently ignores the long history of Jewish exclusion from many professions, especially in Europe. For centuries, Jews were often barred from owning land or entering many trades, leading them to work in areas such as finance, trade, and money lending, which were some of the few avenues available and also correlated with their religious rules. Also, speaking on religious rules, a common far-right narrative is that Judaism is some anomaly and being a religion that sees non-Jews as lesser than and beneath them, aka a lot of the Goy memes. Islam, Christianity, and Judaism all talk down on non-believers, along with their texts preaching to protect your fellow religious community members. Although I don't think any human should be seen as lesser for simply worshipping a different god or prophet, the irony of Christians and Muslims framing religious ingrouping as something exclusive to only Jewish people is hilarious. It's similar to when Christians, Muslims, and Jewish people all argue about which ideology has the most pedophiles or morally corrupt figures, when all of them have very questionably aged women getting pregnant or consummated with. Also, staying on the fun topic of pedophilia, people bring up this image of the Talmud. The Talmud is a long series of hypotheticals and arguments under Jewish law, and most of these are taken out of context or straight up don't exist. Christians and Muslims have also both looked after their own kind in the past and now, and treated non-believers worse, so as an agnostic, this talking point referring to the Jews kinda seems like selective outrage. Anyways, going back to religious rules, if you adhere to your religion and find interest in being rich to be sinful, then you shouldn't be surprised if the religion that preaches the complete opposite ends up with more people in finance and handling money. Similarly, the overrepresentation of Jewish people in Hollywood can be traced back to the early 20th century, when many Jewish immigrants fleeing Eastern Europe sought new opportunities in America. They found work in the rapidly growing film industry, where they quickly rose to prominence with studios popping up like Paramount, MGM, Warner Brothers, etc. I actually learned in a film class that 20th Century Fox was nicknamed the Goy Studio back in the 40s. My teacher, Mr. Avi Goldstein, actually gave me an A on a paper I wrote about it because I started it off with Shalom. That was a joke, but most of these far-right types would actually believe it, and I doubt they even got this far in the video. Anyways, Jewish influence in Hollywood became more notable, leading to narratives that they put hidden messaging in our media like race mixing and the LGBTQ, but that falls apart anytime you look into the credits of something and see non-Jewish people. Now don't get me wrong, Jewish people can and 100% should be criticized on harmful business practices, nepotism, or purposely maintaining footholds in certain industries. However, most of the time, the people who do so are critiquing them for legitimately dishonest reasons. As a leftist, I critique capitalists and ethno-nationalism regardless of the involved party's race or religion. The far right, on the other hand, takes the viewpoint that the problem is that they don't have a foothold in whatever industry they're discussing. The far right doesn't care about billionaires and CEOs exploiting the working class or persecution of people based on their race and religion unless you frame it as the Jews doing those things, or if it's their team doing it. I've genuinely had discussions with far-righters who defend Nazi Germany and Rhodesia, but hate Israel with a burning passion for having a Jewish state while denying white people one. Which is kind of insane in my opinion. I don't think there should be, any ethno-state or any country only meant for one type of people, but I'll get into that in a later vid. In conclusion, the far-right conspiracy theories that links a Jewish agenda with communism in the USSR are built on distortions, half-truths, and deliberate manipulations designed to fuel antisemitism and advance an ideological agenda. While Jewish individuals, including Marx and Trotsky, were involved in the development of communist theory, they were part of a much larger, more diverse historical movement that included people of many backgrounds. The claims that Jews as a group engineered communism to destroy Western civilization, or that they controlled major global events like world wars, are not only factually incorrect most times, but also just straight up incoherent. By examining the facts that don't care about your feelings, it becomes clear that these conspiracies ignore key historical context, oversimplify movements that were at their core driven by class struggles and critique of oppressive systems, and straight up lie at times with quotes that you can't even find besides white supremacist websites or people just making blogs. Ultimately, while the Jewish community is not exempt from criticism such as any other demographic, these myths serve to distract from the real issues: class exploitation, imperialism, and the manipulation of power of capitalists as a whole, and instead scapegoat an entire group of people for the world's problems. Anyways, if you got this far, thank you for watching. If you liked the video, give it a comment, thumbs up. I know the comment section is going to be toxic, but at least try to engage in good faith. So see you in the next video, and bye.